What is up, guys? We are back to talk today on another topic that's in our relationship series. We thought it prudent to go over closure. Okay, when we're talking closure here, we're talking romantic relationship, we're talking platonic relationships, we're talking closure around trauma, we're talking around closure around literally anything. But we thought it important for us to go over. There's been some developments in my life, and maybe some anecdotes that we can kind of pull on that would be good to communicate. Big changes. So, if I do say so, let's start with what is closure.
Cool. So, as I think about it, the idea of closure is basically just a process that allows somebody to move on fully without being tied or weighed down by unresolved feelings, sentiments, thoughts, emotions about some prior event. And typically I say event because it's usually an event connected to a relationship, connected, whether that's a romantic, platonic relationship, whether it's in relation to something else, whether it be like an opportunity or something of that effect. It's usually some event that takes place that then creates some degree of trauma response. And then when somebody moves past that event and doesn't get that closure, that feeling of, okay, a wound was created, did I go back through, clean the wound up, get the dirt out of it, patch it up, did it heal in a more complete, more total way, or did it linger a bit? Is it still going to cause problems down the road if it does go unresolved? And not that all unclosed events do that, but they have a higher propensity to do that than things that are properly healed, resolved, and then moved on from entirely. So that's like the real broad definition of closure to me. And closure is of value and importance so that somebody can proceed along in their future and not just continually. It's like if somebody hurts their ACL and they only recover like 85%, there's going to be a certain kind of bottleneck on how they can perform in other areas based on being hindered by being at 85% on your ACL, where maybe to push something else to a full 100%, you need that ACL to be at 85, or it caps everything else at a 90 or 95 or something like that. So unresolved issues can kind of cap out one's ability. So let's say in a romantic relationship, to, like, people call it baggage, right? But typically that baggage comes from a lack of closure. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, I've looked through my suitcase, I got everything I need, or the one that I left at the airport is cool, like I
Don't need it anymore.
Don't need it anymore, So that's my idea of closure, how I understand it, relate to it.
Cool. So I think that's a good way to break it down, and I think it's interesting. You're talking about if your ACL, your knee, doesn't get to 85%, it caps everything else at 90. I think that's an interesting point, and metaphorically, we can kind of yank that over here. I think that there's many things and many instances and many people that have been in our lives, and I can really only speak for me, but I would say that if I'm feeling this, I'm sure that there's a lot of other people that are too. I don't think I'm so unique that I have these wild experiences that nobody else has. So there have been individuals in my life that I've maybe not in the relationship, maybe platonically and otherwise, maybe I haven't led like a man. Maybe I haven't led as I should. Maybe I haven't put my best foot forward. Maybe I haven't addressed things when they needed to be addressed. And because of that, in a lot of ways, those relationships have never been the same. Now, some of those people in my life, some of those people not in my life, some of those people more recently, I'll go into an anecdote here in just a second, got closure on a relationship, a previous relationship, a previous friendship that has kind of just been out there in the ether and detached from me understanding that I'm the cause for us being detached, but not really having a way to kind of piece the puzzle back together and understand, where do I go from here? But it's because I didn't put myself in a position from the jump to be vulnerable. So that kind of brings me to this. I think that for closure, there's a couple steps regardless. First, you got to acknowledge, okay? And we're not talking about 12-step acknowledgement, but you got to acknowledge.
But it's acknowledgement.
But it's the same acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge that there is a disconnect, that there is a disparity, that there is something that has gone on that needs to be addressed. From there, I believe you have to be willing to try to rectify by putting yourself in a vulnerable position with surrendering of the outcome. You don't have the capability to seek out closure and to chase closure with control over the outcome. You have no idea how that other individual is going to react. You have no idea how much damage you've done to them, to their mental, to your relationship, the tarnished relationship that is almost non-existent now when you reach back out or when you try to seek that closure. Again, I think that would be reason to try to gain closure at a shorter time window than 4.5 years,
letting
3.5 years. Yeah, because how much damage has that done to everyone else that's been in your life? How much damage has that done to the individual that you didn't seek out closure with because you weren't willing to swallow your ego? And I think acknowledgement, desire with surrendering the outcome, but then also you've kind of got to shoot the ego through the face. The ego can be a great thing for you to understand, for you to have a relationship with, but to get closure, you have to destroy it, at least for that interaction. And so I'm talking in circles here for a second. A specific example of this is more recently, I had someone that I promised, regardless of who I dated, that I would not drop as a friend. I would not abandon her. I wouldn't do it. Absolutely not. Could never. Loved her deeply. Well, I was a piece of shit. And when push come to shove, I decided to take the romantic relationship over the friend. Now, yes, you've got to shift priorities. If you're pursuing someone romantically, there probably needs to be a high priority on that partner. And
see our episode on the value of platonic relationships.
And not necessarily a higher value on that platonic relationship, but there still can be priority to both. We don't exist in a vacuum, and there is definitely a need and big benefit that can come from that platonic relationship. But I do want to walk back one statement from that episode, and that's that it's not an absolute statement that I will never prioritize a romantic partner over a friend, because that's just not true.
Maybe you won't do it to the detriment of the friendship.
Correct. I'm not going to do it to the point where I abandon a friend ever again. That period, point blank, won't happen, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes anybody. However, I've seen more recently that prioritizing a friend at maybe a higher priority than my romantic partner is not going to end me up anywhere great. It's actually just going to end me up on the sidewalk by myself. So there is something to be said for that. But anyways, that person 3.5 years ago, that was 2017 or 2021, I reached out to recently. And I reached out to, didn't know how she was going to respond, but really just kind of fell on my sword, let her know that I realized that I was the reason that things transpired the way that they did, and I didn't honor my word, and I didn't need anything from her, but I just wanted her to know that I fucked up, and I'm doing better these days, and I hope she's doing well, and that I don't desire a deep friendship, but if she ever needs anything, that I'm here. And to my surprise, everyone listening, to my surprise, she responded same day, very soon after, and was positive, and was surprised, and was encouraged that I took the time and set the intention to reach out to her and apologize for it. Now, do I think that this person and I are going to be besties for the resties? Probably not. Absolutely, probably not. But I do know that now she knows that if there is anything that's large in her life, I mean, at one point we did have deep context. We were very, very close to one another. So if anything does go down, that she needs someone there, at least she knows that I'm there if she needs it. Don't expect that she'll want to be in my life. It's been more than a handful of years since we've communicated. But I think that, that was the first step of many, many things in my life where I've sought closure. And in some previous relationships, that same day I reached out to a more recent ex-girlfriend and fell on my sword again. It was just like James is just falling on sword day, That Monday was just, let's just go ahead and open myself up. And it was kind of a day where I was overwhelmed with emotion. And not because I was crying in the club, but I was in a position where I was just like, I've had a lot of baggage that I've been carrying, that I've been toting behind me through every workout, through every job, through every relationship, through every person I'm going on a date with. I'm dragging, 42 bags behind me. But why? Is it because I have too much ego to open them and address them? Throw away what I need to, give away the other stuff, and have a conversation. Is it an ego problem? What is it? I don't know. But after a weensy bit of a journey in the woods, I came to a lot of realizations. And one of it was that, I needed to reach out to these individuals. I needed to reach out to the people that I felt that I've wronged in the past, regardless of what they say, do, respond with, whether they want to hit me in the face or what have you. Like, I can't control that, but what I can do is do my best to lead. So, I don't know. That's, that's kind of where I'm at with that. And for those of you that do listen to these, we did record this episode once before.
I didn't say it because I'm like, I don't always got to let the folks know where I fucked up. But what happened effectively was I thought we were recording, but the mics were not armed. So if anybody in here does audio, it was recording, but that only matters if you arm the individual tracks to also record the inputs to those tracks, and that I did not do. So anyhow, this is the round two, but it's definitely more succinct.
And I only make that not even so much a disclaimer, but just a share of vulnerability there, because I feel like I am talking more in circles than we were last time, where I was high level. Let's run it. But in your life, more recently, any experiences with deep closure, anything that you've faced that you didn't necessarily love, or anything that maybe helped you prioritize the closure, at least in some format, that we could give the people that are listening to this? Because I feel like sometimes as men, we try to be the strong man. We try to be the, we gotta, we're the soldiers, we're the
when you're too stiff, when you try to be so firm, so strong, so taut, it makes it easy to break you.
Oh yeah, because you're inflexible, so you just snap.
So I feel like the getting in tune with one's own emotions, that's what can give you that additional flexibility, right? It limbers you up. But then if you're too flexible, you're putty. You can't put form to anything. There's no structure. So once again, this is just another lesson about how we got to stay balanced out in this thing to hit our optimum potential. And as far as closure goes, I mean, I'd say over the last, I've had a few different big things emotionally in terms of interpersonal relationships in the last few years that have allowed me to kind of move on and drop some of the bags. It's not like I dropped each one, like I dropped all the bags at one time and all of a sudden I was 80 pounds lighter. It's like, all right, let me drop a couple zips here. Let me drop a quarter pound here. Let me drop a few bowls here, Now I'm just talking like my old ways. But I just wanted to run with it for a second. Any of y'all out here know what a bow is. But so the highlights that come to me in terms of interpersonal relationships, so my mom, I had a conversation with her around the same week or so that I moved into this particular house, just because growing up, me and my brother had a weird upbringing. We were bouncing back and forth between different caretakers, my great-grandparents, my mom for a little while, my pops, but it was like a ping-pong thing. And long story short, my mom was absent from a large section of my upbringing. Like she was gone a little more than she was present for many, many years. And I didn't really realize the impact it had on me until I got much older. And as I was really sitting back and reflecting on the impact of that relationship, the most important relationship interpersonally with a woman that I ever had as a man, a boy, obviously when I'm born, baby boy, you grow up, adolescence, all of that. I hadn't really given that too much space or energy to see how it led to other issues or tendencies or attachment problems I had with other women in my life because I didn't have that solved at the root of my relationship with my mother. This same thing can happen a lot of times with women, with men, because of the relationship they may not have had with their father. And so having gained some additional clarity on that, one day we're just really chopping it up and we just kind of get into it and, bless her soul, she's very self-aware. And even when I was younger, she at different moments in time spoke to me and my brother, just apologized, just for how things played themselves out. She was never a bad mother or hateful or anything like that. It was just kind of sometimes when you're just super absent, not necessarily anything of her own fault, but it still can have its impact, whether it was intended or not. And so being able to sit down and have that conversation, it lightened my spirit just a touch to be able to actually voice these things, to be able to break down sobbing about how I needed my mommy, you know what I'm saying? And as a grown-ass man, having never really given the space to it because my coping mechanism growing up was just get rigid, you know what I'm saying? Get rigid, get angry, hit some shit. And, that works well for football, you know what I mean? But when you're no longer sanctioned to just run a nigga's full speed day in, day out, be the hammer or be the nail on any given day,
it's allowed and it's actually
encouraged. It's rooted on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It can open doors for certain people. That can become a very maladaptive behavior. And I realized a couple moments where it was like, yo, if I don't get this anger shit in check, like, I'm gonna kill somebody. You know what I mean?
Important to realize.
And so just then prioritizing the kind of disillusion of my ego over many years of, okay, all right, let me stop thinking that X quality or X trait is what makes Sae'Von Sae'Von, and that if I diminish that or I dilute it a bit, that it will be detrimental versus net positive to my overall development. Because I think oftentimes we can get very bought into this idea of ourselves, and similarly, we get bought into the narrative of a relationship, of an event, and we actually have a tendency to rewrite or selectively direct and edit our version, our cut of a relationship. And when we go back through these moments of having to reconcile or try to create some closure, and once again, as you mentioned, that closure really begins with the self seeking closure. And then if it works out for the other person, all honky-dory, two birds, one stone kind of thing. But otherwise, we're aiming for that closure for ourselves. And what can prevent somebody, at least in my experience, from taking that next step is that attachment to what the narrative was, how we constructed it of why the fallout happened, why the relationship ended, why X, Y, Z thing happened. Because usually what you actually have to do is go back through, pull out all of the footage, not just your final edit that you love, and really look like, oh, okay, well, maybe this was a better scene than that, and fuck, maybe this needed to be revised a bit, and maybe this whole section shouldn't have been in there, and you eventually are really just looking at kind of like this list of your fuck-ups. It's like the inverse highlight reel, and that can be challenging, not just for men, I think particularly for men, because this idea that we do things the right way or whatever, and it's definitely a process. So being able to do that with my mother was one instance. And I'd say emotionally speaking, most of those moments for me have been with women that I've had some type of attachment to, fondness to, love for. And they've all been different in their nature, but at some point it was kind of a realization that, okay, if I don't change something or if I don't try to make some sort of adaptation, how is this ultimately going to play itself out? But I want to pivot for a quick moment, just 'cause I feel like we've discussed the romantic of the relationship time. More recently, I had to gain closure on a career event, if you want to call it that, because I think a lot of people think about things in terms of career, life, and all this. But basically, long story short, as many of you listeners may know, I'm in these markets, I'm in this blockchain game, and as such, I move around money. And I took an L That was the largest L I had taken thus far in my life. I've taken some big L's, but I took a pretty substantial, what most people would consider a substantial financial L earlier this year, based on my positioning in the markets and what my strategy was. And when it initially happens, there's kind of that disbelief, like, nah, this shit will bounce back. You're like, we'll get it back. But all I'm getting at is I had to take the time to recognize if I didn't shift my perception and have that short-term memory like an athlete is supposed to have, and just say, you know what, win some, lose some. Some wins are big, some losses are big, then it would have prevented me from being able to have the clarity of mind to move forward without fear, without being on my tiptoes because, oh my God, something broken. There might be one small piece of glass left on the floor, and oh my God, I just would hate to get this itty bitty splinter. Versus like, hey man, it's gonna take a whole lot for my foot not to work, even if there's some pain. And so that whole process of closure, once again, it teaches you or allows you to have some perspective on what you did wrong, which should then necessarily show you what you should do to be better, and can kind of just let you acknowledge it, let it go, kind of like a ritual of sorts where you just, you write down how you feel, you burn a piece of paper, you write down your desires, you burn it, just to demonstrate like, I by releasing all, I have it all, everything, kind of you start to get into those dualistic Taoist thoughts. But yeah, man, closure's a hell of a thing, dude.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that, sitting before you here, that in a lot of situations, in most situations in my life, I haven't sought it out, until more recently. In most situations in my life, I've decided I'm just going to be the strong man, the large man, the man that doesn't fear anything, doesn't feel anything, fears no man, that bleeds red and isn't afraid of his thoughts, except for a lot of times, if I'm running, just like many of us, if we're running from something, there's probably some fear there.
Yeah.
If we're avoiding something, there's probably something else going on. So I don't know. We're not going to string this along, but I really think that we could all benefit from maybe not being, dare I say, trauma vampires, but going in the direction of giving space to your thoughts, giving space to your emotions, giving space to, your fuck ups, making a list of the things that you actually did wrong in some things, and then being willing to give yourself grace and move on. Give yourself mercy, move on. Try to rectify relationships if you can. But I'm telling you this right now, and this was brought to my attention, if you reaching out to another individual is going to cause more harm to them than potential benefit to you, don't do it. You can find closure without having a conversation.
You don't always got to throw the rock to ripple somebody else's lake.
You definitely, if you know someone is extremely bothered by your existence that used to be in your life, it might not be a grand idea to interrupt their simulation. If it's not, you'll know. And if it's actually
that deep. Yeah.
in the best interest of them for you to reach out. Or is it self-serving and you kind of want to just see what happens because you want to spice it up? Cool. Go spice it up in your journal and then burn it. Go do something else. Like there's many practices, there's many means to go down gaining closure. But I mean, keep that in mind that like closure is for you. So you don't necessarily need to interrupt everybody else's life, especially if someone said, I don't ever want to hear from you again.
Did you listen to that advice?
Did I listen to that advice? In some instances and in others not. I feel... Go ahead.
I was going to say thank you for bringing that back up because we did touch on that in the first recording.
Yeah.
But that's like a pivotal point that you alluded to earlier, but you didn't explicitly spell out.
Yeah, there's instances where people have stated, don't ever speak to me again.
You're like, oh, she ain't mean it.
and I've made some discernments, and in some cases, I'm like, yeah, she actually means that. And in others, I'm like, nah, she doesn't mean that. If they mean it, don't do it. If they don't mean it, or if you think it's something said out of anger or heightened emotion, that's different.
Tap in truly to your intuition and try to do it from as neutral of a place as possible.
Yeah, because there's definitely a difference in someone being mad at you and saying something and someone being completely even keel and saying something, you should take that more seriously. Closure is about, you working through the things that you have so that you don't bring it into another relationship. I mean, more than anything, yes, you have to live with yourself. You show up and look in the mirror every day, but you also, it's not necessarily beneficial. And I don't feel like it's right for any of us. If we know that there's something going on, why then take that and thrust it upon the next individual that's in our life, romantically or friend-wise or what have platonically or whatever? Like, why? Why take the trauma from mom and push that on a partner? Why take the trauma from the lack of closure from a previous business partner and throw that on the new business partner?
But it all requires that self-awareness.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's what I think the struggle is, to really sit in a place to acknowledge that you haven't dealt with it. You haven't processed it. And I in my experience, it's often third parties who can see it with a little more clarity than the individual can, depending on where they're at. And, we've both had our journeys in the forest to different extents, but there's a lot of practices somebody can tap in with to better refine and develop that self-awareness. And usually it's after that process begins that one starts to have all these like, oh, damn. Oh, wow. Oh, man.
But I think what's interesting when you're looking at plant medicine or you're looking at anything else, for any of those things to quote unquote come to you after, you have to be open-minded.
Yep.
So for example, me even starting this closure process came from, yes, a journey, but then secondarily sitting at an accountability meeting and Sae'Von telling another one of our brothers that you've got to be the man and you've got to lead. And him not even talking to me, but then me applying that to my situation and situations. I was like, damn, I haven't been a great leader. And there's things that I need to open up. There's things that I need to go through. And I need to, kill my ego here and just seek that closure. So I think that there's, if you're self-aware and if you're open to being more self-aware, a lot of things will rear their ugly heads.
But that's how you beautify the whole landscape, though. You got to acknowledge that's a blemish.
Yeah, and you've got to, map out a way to work through it. So that is, you got anything else?
Nah, man, just, close up those wounds, let that baggage go so you can fly.
Yeah.
It's going to suck. Most likely.
It's not fun.
Until it doesn't.
I mean, but that's everything, right? Sucks till it doesn't.
So don't let that scare you off, man, because on the other side of that shit can be some of the most rewarding, fulfilling, beautiful, experience, but you got to wade through the uncomfortable.
And you might find that on the other side of, that closure, you're loving deeper and more aggressively than you ever have, and those around you are doing the same for you.
Amen.
You might finally be receiving and giving the love that you deserve and those around you deserve. Might just take you, really being open to criticism and open to, some internal reflection, regardless of how you get there. Journaling, meditation, yoga, journeys in the forest, plant medicine, whatever. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to do it, and a lot of them you can combine, but regardless, you've got to give space to it. And I think that that's kind of where it all comes back around. I mean, you've got to give space to it. So that's all I've got.
I'm good.
Cool. Well, thank y'all for coming out. Everything is long form video on YouTube and audio on every streaming platform. We're on every single one of them. So if you miss us, it's your fault, not ours. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a great day.
Peace.